Chapter 18. For Rent. 128 virtual tablets containing 128 resumes sat before Jim and Sarah. 128 lifelines, really. The memory of the 129th weighed heavily on the minds of all of the other 128 remaining. Most of their resumes were littered with notes begging for their lives. A couple asked to end it quickly. It was 128 lives whose only hope rested on two. The math was not good. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but you have to pull it together. We have to find a way to make them all relevant," said Jim. Sarah was crying, looking hopelessly at several tablets. Of course, he was just about as ready to break as she was. This was a terrible task, but it was one Jim begged AZ for. He knew he couldn't let some random member of the gang go over the list. Those people's best hope for survival rested with them. AZ let him do it, but only because Jim promised to get the best return on his new slaves. "Relevant? How could a human life not be relevant?" said Sarah, holding up two virtual tablets, tears streaming down her face. Sarah sat on the floor of the medieval castle dungeon Jim was normally kept in. All around her were dozens of tablets, most still unsorted. Light poured in through several barred windows around the cell, casting warm, reflective light around the otherwise dreary stone walls. The light did little, though, to relieve the pressure crushing their spirits. Jim sat at the desk, entering in the forms for AZ to look over on his ancient virtual computer. Outside of Sarah and himself, their only other company was Charlie the Shark Man on his endless patrol of the halls. Nate was off working on modifying more autonomous cars for AZ's delivery service. That would guarantee 5 neural encasements life, but what about the other 123? The 3 doctors were easy to justify. Even just examinations via camera would make them useful. It was always possible Nate might even obtain robotic arms that would allow them to do treatment. But what do you do with 7 lawyers in a world without law? Jim had clerks, janitors, waitresses, and a lot of middle management. How much value could any of these poor souls have to a gang of retrobates? There were 31 people with solid skills to offer, even without bodies. But the other 97 had little more use than as paperweights. Even a basic laborer had 2 hands. These people had nothing. It was hardly their fault. They were retired. They spent their entire lives working hard, with real hands, to earn a second carefree life, free of the harsh outside world. But cruel fate had stolen away that life. That same world banished them into a pitch-black void for nearly a decade, and now stood ready to eliminate them altogether. What could these 97 people do to stay alive? In front of Jim were cold, hard numbers on his screen. Name after name in one vast spreadsheet, but only with a few dotted entries under useful skills. "Damn it!" said Jim as he stood up and smashed his thin, pasty white hand down on the desk in front of him. Charlie the Shark Man stopped in his patrol for a moment to look in on Jim before coolly marching off to the other end of the hallway outside the cage. Jim looked at Sarah, trapped between anger and shame. His outburst only made him feel like a hypocrite. Jim dropped his shoulders, leaned on the desk, and said, "What are we going to do?" Sarah stood up with 2 tablets still in hand and walked over to Jim. "Maybe we're going about this all the wrong way," she said as she wiped off her face on her sleeve. Then she put down the 2 tablets in front of Jim. Under skills, both listed random things like knitting and baseball. Each had more handwriting on her notes than anything else, and those notes were full of fear. "If you can think of anything at all, I want to hear it, because from what I can see, I'm looking at 97 dead men and women. They just don't know it yet," said Jim as he picked up one of the 2 tablets. The name on the tablet was Jim as well, Jim Thompson, a lifelong Coast Guard with a hobby in woodworking. "Well, we're looking at it as whom is the most useful to AZ and his gang of cronies. But to them, most people in the world aren't useful. It's either predator or prey. But everybody's useful to somebody, right?" said Sarah. "All right," said Jim as he turned to Sarah. His withered jester body was at least 2 inches shorter than her youthful French maid form. Her closeness muddled his senses. Why was it only now they were together? "But how are we going to connect our head boys to those people? Create some kind of hiring agency? Take out an ad in the paper under Work Wanted?" said Jim. He tried not to make it sound too sarcastic, but it seemed like a useless suggestion. "Maybe we can," said Sarah. Jim looked at her with one of his large, absurdly long eyebrows raised. "What if we rented them out for odd jobs like, how about a security guard that watches a cam or something? You don't need a body to sit there and watch a door, right?" "I don't know. Seems like a long shot." "And wouldn't we just be putting them at more risk sending them out there into that chaotic world alone?" asked Jim. "Could it be any worse than keeping them here with these cold-blooded killers?" asked Sarah. Jim did feel sort of stupid for not thinking that himself. While he didn't know what kind of criminal scum existed beyond the ship they were imprisoned in, it would be hard to believe the people outside could be any worse. "All right, you got a point. But who will look after them?" said Jim, picturing someone's poor neural case being used as a doorstop or falling off a countertop. "Jim, they survived a fire, a building collapse, and a decade of abandonment. I think they can survive a week or two on a shelf of somebody's shop. Maybe Nate can go out and do a service round every week or so. And who knows what, useful things they might learn outside of this damn ship?" said Sarah, carefully hinting at the possibility of escape. Jim instinctively looked around at nothing in particular, as his brain registered the clandestine thought Sarah was hinting at. This might be a brilliant plan. "I can try running it by AZ, said Jim reluctantly. Jim reached into his colorful tights in the only pocket they offered. Out of it he retrieved the virtual cell phone. Sarah looked at the phone and nervously back at Jim. Neither of them dared use it before to contact AZ. It was like packing around a brick of C4. Outside of contacting Nate, they left the little rectangle alone. Jim hovered his finger over the button for AZ and looked at Sarah. "Okay, play cool," said Jim. He didn't know why he said that. He never said things like that. But it seemed appropriate. Jim tapped the button. He didn't have to hold it up to his ear. The device was just a software construct, and its sound was wired into his whole simulation. Still, Jim held the fake phone up to his face and listened nervously to the dial tone. It rang like a phone from the early 21st century, even though it really used the gang's mesh network to handle the direct data connection. Or at least that's what Nate told Jim. None of that made any sense to him. However it worked, it seemed like a cell phone. There was a click, and suddenly AZ's voice rang out everywhere in the simulated dungeon with, "Hey, J-Star! Look at you calling me directly. There's been a running bet how long it'd take you to use the phone. Hey, who's got 3 weeks?" AZ, sir? We have a suggestion for the new people," started Jim. But AZ's voice was already dropping off as a conversation was happening elsewhere in the room he was in. Suddenly AZ's voice returned. "Boom, boy! Has he blown himself up yet? If he's dead, the pool's money is mine, you understand? I had a month. That's close enough." Then AZ's attention returned back to the phone. "So, J-Star, what's the reason behind this long overdue call?" "We've been going over the resumes," started Jim. "Oh, great. So how many good ones versus duds? The boys have been aching to pop open another case. I was thinking of popping open one of those geezers myself, dumping the brain, and filling it with candy. Don't tell the boys, it'll be hysterical," said AZ. Great, thought Jim, as murderous as always. At least he seemed to be in a good mood. "Yeah, about that. I think we have a way to make all of the people useful, and make some great money for you in the process," said Jim. Sarah looked fearfully between the glowing phone and Jim with their comically large eyes, still reeling from what AZ had just said. "Oh man, no Pinata Tuesdays? Jeez. So what's the big plan, J-Star? Suicide bombers? Oh man, I like that one. Hey, somebody write down Bucket Geezer Suicide Bomber. I want to remember that one later," said AZ. Jim's mind shuddered. How is this call going south so quickly? "We hire them out to others and rake in a ton of money. They're the perfect employees. They can work late, they don't need lunch breaks, and they're always on task," started Jim. "A talent agency for bucket geezers? That's your big plan? Boring. I don't want to keep track of these paperweights. And they don't even have hands," said AZ. "But there's a lot they can do without hands, sir. And you won't have to do anything. We'll handle it all. Our drivers can drop them off and pick them up as needed," said Jim as he did his best to sell the plan. AZ groaned. "I'm not in love with this plan, J-Star. It lacks gusto. But I guess we could put off Pinata Tuesdays for another week or two. I still need a list of all the winners and losers. If you can't find a use for those fish, I want to know who to start with first." Yes, sir. We won't let you down," said Jim. But before he could finish talking, AZ was already yelling at somebody else in the room. "Somebody find Boom Boy! I got a project for him!" started AZ before the line finally cut out. Jim looked at Sarah, whose expression was similar to a party guest, finding out that the birthday cake was made out of cat food. "Well, that could have gone better," said Jim. Instantly, Jim's virtual phone began to ring, and on the screen was a painting of AZ wearing a crown. 2 buttons were below it that said, "Answer" and "Hang up and die." Jim pressed the answer button. "Hey, J-Star, I forgot to mention, I sent out one of these phone things you're holding to each and every fish. I even made an introductory video for him. Check this out," said AZ. Then the audio of the call dropped out, and a video of AZ appeared on the phone screen. It was the Bronze God version of AZ, like the one he used in the group VR meeting. A little play message flashed on the screen, and the godlike version of AZ spoke. Hey, losers! This is your loving and vengeful God, AZ. I just want to let you all know that if you want to get on my good side, confess the sins of others to me directly. Tell me all about any and all treachery against myself and the Bloody Eye, and you'll earn a place among my chosen people. Just don't waste your lord's time, lest I smite your fishbowl asses down. You know I'm good at smiting. Talk to you later, peons. Your lord out. After that, the screen dropped back to the menu. AZ already hung up. Really, did he need to say anything else? 128 people just gained the ability to destroy any and all escape plans in an instant. All it would take is just one person desperate enough to save themselves. AZ really did think of everything. Jim looked at Sarah just as she said, "Oh,